I want to get into exactly how Washington managed to win this one, because I think even though they were favored in this one, it was still a surprise. Obviously, they stormed the field after the game. There were some people saying that like they shouldn't have stormed the field, or like there's a whole weird thing in college football Twitter, especially people trying to gatekeep who can storm the field and who can't. Who gives a shit? Let people have fun, by the way. Vandy, that was an awesome scene, by the way. Carry those goalposts all the way to, I don't know, Roanoke for all I care. Could you make it to Roanoke from there? Probably not. I don't know the mountains very well. I live in Michigan. It's flat as hell out here. How did Washington win this game? Well, it's really not that complicated. They came out firing, and they tested Michigan's secondary, which is something that a lot of people, I think, a lot of teams haven't done so far this season. Jim, I see your comment, by the way. We are going to get into Penn State versus SC later on in the show if you want to stay tuned. Washington came right at Michigan's defense, and first play of the game hit a like 36-yard completion. But they came out confident. They came out firing downfield, and they tested Michigan's defense, which then stretched the field and made Michigan play a lot more honest. Now, Michigan, that whole scheme relies a lot on kind of keeping the top on the offense. They keep two safeties back a lot. If they have a safety down, by the way, and I think a lot of, honestly, in like a pure meta game kind of conversation, I think a lot of college offenses are catching on to the amoeba defense, but that's not something we need to go down a whole rabbit hole on here. That's something we'll probably get on in the off season. That'll just bore you guys at this point. Jim R with the super chat, $20. Appreciate that. Congrats. Thank you. Is that a congrats to us on the new show, or is that a congrats to Vanderbilt? So I see some comments about Vanderbilt too. Either way, congrats to both. Raise a glass to Vandy. Hey, Nate Bargatze's having a hell of a day, I'll bet. Hell of a time. If you don't know who Nate Bargatze is, I don't know why you wouldn't. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. Washington beat Michigan because they were finally a team that had the confidence and the ability to stretch the field on that Michigan defense, even though they usually keep a roof on it, even though they usually keep two safeties back. Like I was saying, if you just see one safety back, usually the other safety is going to rotate into some deeper coverage to it. So it's one of the ways they disguise. Sometimes that safety will stay in the box, but most of the time they don't. Anyway, Rodgers starts out in this game, by the way. By the time the game is 14-0 after those first few possessions, 8 of 12, throwing for 75%. I can do that math all day. For 129 yards. By the time, again, this game is 14-0 with 9:38 left in the first half. 129 yards, 8 of 12. 2 of the first completions went for more than 30 yards, which, again, stretched the field, softens Michigan's defense, by the way, and got the running game going, I'm going to say just enough. Jonah Coleman ran just enough to kind of keep Michigan on its feet, where they had to cover the entire field because Washington was testing them downfield. They took advantage of Jair Hill, the young corner. They even went after Will Johnson later in this game, and they exposed Will Johnson a little bit too. I'm not going to lie. That pass interference. The game was already over at that point. But Coleman, 18 carries for 80 yards for 4.4 yard average, which is about all he needed to do. Of course, he had a long of 27. So outside of that long carry, it wasn't that great. I think Michigan held him to just 3 yards per carry or so outside of that one, but did just enough to keep Michigan's defense, on its toes. They had a trick play in this game, by the way, a double pass. By the way, you can try stuff like that, Michigan, just saying. Washington really was the more confident team here, and obviously it shows. And it's interesting going back to kind of the 30,000-foot view of things with Michigan and Washington, because these teams have a lot in common. These teams played against each other in the national championship game. These teams lost a lot in the offseason. These teams had to replace a lot, and now the timeline was different. I think a lot of what Jim Harbaugh did with kind of hanging around and lollygagging around for a little bit and then finally taking an NFL offer, J.J. McCarthy hanging around a little bit, and there was kind of a will he, won't he with the NFL move for him, kind of threw Michigan down a path where they weren't going to be able to do much in the portal because they couldn't get a quarterback in the portal until after all that happened, for instance. But Washington went out, did a coaching search, found a coach at a program. By the way, Jed Fish was something like 10-3 at Arizona last year. Arizona was a good team. Jed Fish is a good coach. They maintained Will Rogers on the roster. He had already committed to Kalen DeBoer before he left. They brought a bunch of guys in like Joel Coleman, et cetera, from Arizona, from a pretty good Arizona team. And they were able to put something together in short time that's actually a pretty good team. If you've been watching Washington so far this season, yes, they're only like 3-2. Yes, they already have 2 losses to Washington State in that game against Rutgers, but special teams, penalties, and mistakes have killed them. They've shot themselves in the foot. Outside of that, they are a top-tier offense that can move the ball, and if they can sustain drives and especially do well in the red zone down the stretch, they could be a pretty good team. Now, I know their schedule is daunting. I don't have it pulled up here for reference. I don't know exactly who they play. I was watching a podcast earlier today, and they're going over it, and it's a rough schedule from here on out. They play a lot of tough teams in the conference, but look at what Washington was able to do in comparison to Michigan. 2 very different paths. One found a way to get talented people on the roster, and one found a way to just, desperately try to hang on to what they had. And we saw it play out in this game, to be frank. Troy V, did anyone really think JJ was coming back? I didn't. There was some talk out there amongst certain people that there was like an NIL push to keep him. I don't know. I'm not really an insider, but that was a talk. Other notable stats, by the way, from this game, Jack Tuttle came in and gave Michigan's offense a spark for whatever that's worth. They did score on 3 consecutive drives, but as Devin Gardner pointed it out on WTKA this morning, when he was talking to Sam Webb on the Michigan Insider, there were a lot of things they were doing that were specifically schemed to stop Alex Orji, and it seemed like once they stopped doing that, once Jack Tuttle came in and had a couple drives, they were able to kind of shift their defense over that Belichick defense that Washington now runs, because they got Steven Belichick as their offensive coordinator. By the way, Pete Carroll's kid is the offensive coordinator, and Bill Belichick's kid is the defensive coordinator over at Washington. Wild. Anyway, Jack Tuttle this is how bad the quarterback play has been for Michigan so far this season. Jack Tuttle looks like a great quarterback in comparison to these guys, but in this game, he still only goes 10 of 18, just over a 50% completion for 98 yards, a touchdown, an interception, and oh, by the way, he also fumbled the ball. He had a 55 ESPN QBR. This is where we're at with Michigan's quarterback play. And honestly, I thought he looked good in the couple of drives he was in. And again, he provided a spark. He found some running lanes. One of the things Washington was doing against Alex Orji was they're kind of mush rushing a little bit and trying to keep those lanes, and kind of make him stay in the pocket and throw. They did that same thing to Tuttle the first couple of drives, but he was able to find running lanes and get downfield with his legs. Washington shut that down. It looked to me like they started calling some stunts and some more exotic things to keep him guessing on as to where he could potentially run and take off, which was a brilliant move on Steven Belichick's part. Speaking of Michigan quarterback play, Alex Orji started just 3 of 7 for 15 yards. Donovan Edwards was kind of the best part of this Michigan offense in this game. 14 carries for 95 yards and a 6.8 average. Obviously, he had the long touchdown. Khalil Mullins, 14 carries for 49 yards, just a 3.5 average and a long of 7 yards. So Khalil Mullins completely slowed down in this game. Michigan's leading receiver was Colston Loveland, as everyone would probably expect. 6 receptions for just 33 yards. Did have the touchdown. That touchdown was J.J. McCarthy-esque, as I stated in my Discord. By the way, you can go over to Darren Talks Ball, find the link for the Discord in the channel description, and join me talking college football 24/7 over there as well. Longest reception of the day for Colston Loveland, though, 8 yards. 8 yards. That's a bomb that's a whale of a pass for Michigan's offense in 2024. We did have a last note on this game. We did have a Amarion Walker sighting, which was a pleasant sight for us Michigan fans. He got a 22-yard reception. And Jack Tuttle did look good. I would expect him to be the starter so far for the rest of the season, I just don't expect much from this football team altogether because, as I've stated in previous videos on this channel and on my own channel, quarterback isn't the only problem, as we've laid bare so far in the 43 minutes and 54 seconds we've been on air tonight. Is everyone done? Are we done talking about Michigan? We're probably done talking about Michigan, aren't we? Don't forget to get your super chats in. Get more questions in the comments. Ask me anything. Ask me anything about college football specifically. It's not a real ask me anything. Just ask me anything about Big Ten college football. We're going to get into Minnesota and USC next. This is going to be our second recap, and then we're going to get into Ohio State, Oregon, which is frankly probably the game of the year, in my opinion. Not only in the Big Ten, but in all of college football. I think that'll be a really exciting one. And then if we have time, we will also get into Penn State versus USC. Go running a little long in this one. My apologies for that. USC and Minnesota was a great game. And it also kind of showed that you don't need to score a crap ton of points to have an exciting college football game. Welcome to the Big Ten, by the way, USC. Minnesota, by the way. I'm going to set my notes up here because I got a lot of notes to read for this one. Coy Parrish. Remember that name. The kid is a hell of a player. High-level 4-star recruit, by the way. Got offered late in his recruitment to go to Ohio State, but stuck it out and decided to go with his hometown team. The Minnesota kid, safety, by the way, if you're not familiar, with the game-sealing interception and incredible special teams play, by the way, so far this season for Coy Parrish, too. He had the long punt return in the Michigan game, by the way. Minnesota, frankly, should have won that game against Michigan. And if they had, what would we be thinking of Minnesota right now? Taking down two giants in the college football world so far this season. I even put out a video on this very channel talking about how I thought USC was still a Big Ten contender. And boy, did Minnesota prove me wrong. The first half, of course, to kind of recap the game here, it was kind of a bit of a feeling out, determining what type of game this was really going to be kind of thing. USC was trying, from my opinion, to get both their ground game and Miller Moss going. To their credit, I think USC has made some adjustment. Lincoln Riley has put a little more emphasis on running the football, and they did really pretty much get Woody Marks going decently in this game. I think their offensive line, by the way, there's been a lot of critique of their offensive line, and rightfully so. It's not great. It's been a problem for them for years now. Their offensive line is looking decent in the run game, at least. USC, again, trying to kind of get Moss settled in early on in that game, but also get the running game going. I thought that was a good strategy to go with in this one on the road, playing Minnesota. There's also something like a weird record going on so far this year. I think teams traveling more than 2 time zones away in the Big Ten so far this season are like 1-8, which is an interesting thing. In Minnesota, I really thought also had a good game plan for playing a team like USC. So we had two teams that are kind of philosophically opposed in a way, although I think Minnesota throws the ball a little more often than people give them credit for. I don't have the stats on that, but especially with Max Brosmer, who's a good quarterback, by the way. Experienced guy, came from the FCS level, was a very good quarterback there. And what do you know? He's pretty good at the Big Ten conference level, at least so far this season. We got to see them play, other teams outside of the conference in a bowl game or something like that. But playing so far, so good for Max Brosmer. But their emphasis was really, they focused on Darius Taylor, who's their best offensive player. They got him going, kind of recreating, by the way, I thought, from what I saw with some of their play calls, that kind of power-based run offense that Michigan got 2 scores with against USC. They called power multiple times in that first half, and some of them popped up for big runs because USC's run defense, the tackling issues they've had in previous years are pretty much fixed, but it's still there a little bit here and there. I know USC had kind of a banged up secondary, especially in this one, where I think they were missing a safety. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, if you will. And then there was kind of a weird segment, a weird turn of events towards the end of the first half. There were 2 fumbles within 90 seconds of each other. Each team fumbled. First, it was USC as they were kind of driving, looking like they might score to end the first half, and then Minnesota. And then it ended up tied 10-10 at the end of the first half. And I was thinking at that point in the game, this is where USC, with more talent, with a great quarterback, with a great coach in Lincoln Riley. I do think Lincoln Riley is a great coach. Do I think he's an elite coach? Do I think he's one of the best coaches in all of college football? Maybe not, but he's a great coach. I thought they'd make some halftime adjustments. I thought Miller Moss would come out firing. I thought they keep Woody Marks involved and doing enough in the run game to keep Minnesota's defense on their toes. And I thought they'd pull away with this one. And lo and behold, it kind of looked like that at first. It really did. Minnesota got the ball to start the third quarter, and that drive stalls. They punt. USC gets the ball, and what do you know? Just like I suspected at halftime, They go on a 12-play, 91-yard drive that takes 7 minutes and 3 seconds off the clock. They score. They make it 17-10. And then I'm thinking at that point, that game is probably just going to go USC's way because we've seen this time and time again, especially with Lincoln Riley teams. They play with their food a little bit. They get things right in the second half. They did it with Michigan. They were down, 14-3 at half against Michigan and came storming back in that one and kind of figured out that Wink Martindale defense, though. What does it really take to figure out a Wink Martindale defense these days when Will Rogers is doing it? But I digress. Then something happened in that game. And I have been not the biggest fan of PJ Fleck throughout his tenure at Minnesota. Actually, over on my other channel at Darren Talks Ball, we did a Big Ten trends entering the season. I talked about which teams are trending up, which teams are trending down. I had Minnesota as a trending down team. I thought the recruiting hasn't been particularly well. I don't think this Max Brosmer kid, whoever he is from FCS level play, was going to be that great. It seemed like this team was kind of on a downward trend. And then what do you know? PJ Fleck, with great coaching, with his offensive and defensive coordinators calling great games, it turned out they were the ones that made the halftime adjustments. And they took this game over. USC's last 3 drives after that touchdown, by the way. Are you ready for it? This is what happened on their last 3 drives. This is each of their last 3 drives. They go 8 plays for 61 yards, ends in an interception. Then they go 3 plays for just 6 yards, and they punt. And then they go 7 plays for 47 yards, and they have an interception. After that touchdown, about halfway through the third quarter, they only get the ball 3 more times. And in the meantime, I got to flip my notes here. I wasn't thinking it out when I put my notes up there next to the camera. Apologies. We'll get better next time. Does that camera move every time I FUD that down? It does, doesn't it? Look at that. Professional podcast over here. This definitely doesn't have alcohol in it. I'm not drinking on the job, Mark. I promise. Get a little captain in here. Excuse me. Miller Moss in his last 3 possessions, in those last 3 possessions we just mentioned a minute ago, 4 of 10 for 57 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 INTs. Meanwhile, Max Brosmer, the FCS kid, the kid that none of us have heard about so far entering this season, I hadn't heard about him. I feel like I'm a pretty big college football nerd. I don't know about you guys, but I hadn't heard of the guy. Meanwhile, he goes 8 of 10 for 101 yards. They efficiently drive down the field each time they have the ball. Minnesota does. They keep the ball largely out of Miller Moss's hands. Again, 3 possessions. 3 possessions is all they got. Darius Taylor does enough. Again, talking about what we were saying about Jonah Coleman a minute ago in the Washington-Michigan game. Jonah Coleman did just enough in that game running the football to keep Michigan's defense honest. Darius Taylor did the same thing. He didn't have an explosive game, actually. He actually only carried the ball 11 times in the second half for Minnesota, but he got 50 yards out of it and averaged 4.5 yards per carry, which is all he really needed to do. And, of course, the gutsy end of that drive that we have to talk about where Max Brosmer scores on that quarterback sneak. I know there was a little bit of an issue there where some people thought it wasn't actually a score. I can't quite remember if it was reviewed or not, but there's some controversy there. But the guts to call that was 56 seconds left on the clock. You could have kicked the field goal and relied on Corey Parrish in your defense, but instead you go for it. You get the touchdown. Trojan Fight, thank you for watching, said he fumbled the ball on that play too. Yeah, I think that you're probably right. I had to go back and rewatch this game because I was busy on Saturday, not going to lie. But the guts to make that play call. And now maybe it's something we can get into. The officiating so far this season in the Big Ten has been abject. It's been terrible. But you don't apologize for a W. That's one thing we always say on Darren Talks Ball. And Minnesota is not going to be apologizing for this one. If you don't want those calls to happen, by the way, USC fans, don't get into a game with Minnesota in the first place, which you definitely did in the second half. Again, Miller Moss, something like 4 of 10 for just 57 yards from about halfway through the third quarter on. That's not winning football, and USC has a real issue finishing games so far this season. That's what we got on recaps for games. We're going to go ahead and preview one of the biggest games in the Big Ten so far this season, if not all of college football. I am very excited. Even as a Michigan fan, again, I just like good football. I like good football. I don't know about you guys, but I love good football where you got good quarterback play. And we're going to get that here. I'm going to try sending my notes up there again. See if that works out well. I'm going to read some comments for a minute, though, before we get into that one. Don't forget to hit that super chat button. By the way, keep us rolling here at the Voice of College Football. Keep the boss man happy, because honestly, he might not be too happy if you find out what's in this drink right now. It's this Coke. It's this Coke. Don't worry about it. Not drinking on the job, I promise. Oh, Trojan fight. If USC gets all the home calls Minnesota and Michigan got at home, they can beat Penn State. Oh, man. Don't get in games with these teams. I'm sorry, Trojan fight, but like don't get in games with these teams, and the bad officiating won't be a problem. There were calls that Michigan didn't get, by the way, in the USC game. Like, I'm sorry to break it to you, but USC jumped off sides on several of Michigan's drives that just straight weren't called. There were TJ Guy had his helmet ripped off on the sack play, and there was no hands to the face. Yet Mason Graham got a really, really bad hands to the face in the Minnesota game. Was it the Minnesota game? I'm getting them confused now, aren't I? Yeah, there's just been bad officiating across the Big Ten so far this season. We saw what happened in the Marshall-Ohio State game earlier this season, by the way, where they called a penalty that I've never seen in my entire life against Marshall. Jim R., I think OSU has the team this year. Tough to pick against them. OSU is the most complete team in college football. They really are, from top to bottom. I mean, even like when you think about the coaching staff, like the Chip Kelly, Jim Knowles, and Ryan Day is elite. It's elite. I'm saying that as a Michigan fan. Trojan fight. Is it true a lot of the former Pac-12 refs were hired? I don't know. I know there was some combining of things, bringing the things together, but I don't actually know. The Pac-12 lives and survives, by the way. They've added some new teams. I'm blanking on all of them because, frankly, I don't pay that much attention, but I wouldn't be surprised. Big Ten refs have been kind of bad for a few years now, too, though, so I'm not going to blame it all on the former Pac-12 refs. Yeah, just scrolling through the comments here. Manny C., how far does Indiana go? Do they make the playoff? Good question. We're actually going to talk. We can talk a little bit about Indiana for a minute before we get into the Oregon-Ohio State game, because Indiana is kind of one of the biggest stories of college football so far this season. So to get to your question, and I really wish, I gotta apologize to you guys, I do not know how to do the screen share thing on StreamYard yet. That's something I still have to get with TJ and learn. Otherwise, I would share what the rest of their schedule is on the screen with you guys. But I'm just going to read off the rest of their schedule to you. Now, of course, they just beat Northwestern 41-24. A little bit of fraud alert for me to let Northwestern score 24 points and let Northwestern's quarterback, who isn't too terribly good, and Northwestern has like one good receiver, by the way, in AJ Henning. Man, if only Michigan still had Giles Jackson and AJ Henning. Man, I never thought I'd be saying that. To let Northwestern's quarterback score some points on you, I thought was a little iffy. Indiana has actually been, like, in the last couple of games, they've been in close ones until about halfway through the third quarter or like the beginning of the fourth quarter, and then they pull away. At one point, they were only up on Northwestern by like a field goal in the second half. But I'm just going to read off the rest of their schedule, and you can tell me what you think, what you guys think in the comments. They play Nebraska at home after a bye week. They have a bye week this week. Nebraska at home on October 19th. They got Washington at home. That might be a really high-scoring game, actually. That game might end. That might look like Texas Tech versus Oklahoma back in the day, the old Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield game. Except I don't think either of the quarterbacks in this one are that level, but that might be a very high-scoring game. At Michigan State, I could easily see Indiana winning that one, especially with how turnover prone and mistake-prone Michigan State is. Michigan State, by the way, does not have a very good ground game at all. Their 2 running backs are averaging something like 3 yards a carry or even less than that outside of the explosive runs that they got on teams like Prairie View earlier this season. So Michigan State could be a win. Then it gets tough for a couple of weeks. It gets really tough. They play Michigan at home, and they could, I'm going to tell you guys right now, they could beat Michigan. They could beat Michigan. They really could. I think with the offense that they have. And again, we talked about it earlier in the stream. Michigan, 114th in pass defense, giving up over 10 yards per completion to opposing quarterbacks. Curtis Rourke, who would have thought? Who would have thought? Speaking of Ohio, the Ohio Bobcat and Curtis Rourke has to face in-state rival. I don't think Ohio State and Ohio are rivals, but after a bye week between after Michigan, I should say, they travel to the shoe to play the Ohio State Buckeyes. I don't think that one will be a win. Ohio State has SP Plus's #1 rated defense now, by the way. That defense is insanely good. And I believe last time I looked, actually, I could look it up right here if you guys will bear with me for a second. Where is it? Where is it? Talk amongst yourselves for a second. I'm just kidding. Passing yards allowed. Ohio State is 4th in the country in pass defense. Oh, by the way, we mentioned it earlier. 3 of the top 4 teams in pass defense are all teams that have played Michigan. This is how bad Michigan is at throwing the football. Minnesota, Texas, and Washington. And I guarantee you that has a lot to do with the common opponent they all have, because Michigan is that bad throwing the football. Yeah. So Indiana then finishes out their season, of course, in their rivalry game with Purdue, one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the Big Ten. Purdue already just fired their offensive coordinator, and Ryan, I'm blanking on his name. Ryan Braun? No, I can't remember his name. Doesn't matter. He's going to lose his job anyway. He should lose his job. He's not looking very good there for Purdue so far in his 2nd season. I think Indiana could beat Nebraska. I really do. Dillon Gabriel kind of up and down as of late. Now that they've entered Big Ten play, they survived against Rutgers this past week. Washington could be a shootout, but Indiana seems just fine winning shootouts. Honestly, I don't know if they'll win that Washington game. And we'll see against Michigan. They get that game at home. If they can score more than 24 to like 27 points on that Michigan defense, which they could do, they'll win that one. Anyone down the stretch playing Michigan this season, that's kind of my bar for them. If you can score more than like 24 points, you'll win, because that Michigan offense isn't doing anything. They won't beat Ohio State, but they could, man. So we're looking at an undefeated team. They could beat Nebraska, Washington. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, 11-1, 10-2 is on the table for the Indiana Hoosiers. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Yeah. And do they backdoor their way into, excuse me, Big Ten championship game? Who knows? By the way, the Big Ten never should have moved away from divisions. Some of these teams, like with not having divisions, you really water down the schedules for some teams, and other teams you make more difficult. Think about it. If we still had divisions in the Big Ten and you just added the 4 West Coast teams to what was the Big Ten West, and you shuffle things around, I know you'd have to shuffle things around there, and bring some teams over to the East from what used to be the West, because otherwise it'd be unbalanced. But USC, Washington, Oregon, they'd all have to play each other. Iowa would have to play all of them. Minnesota, which is looking like it may be a pretty decent ex-Big Ten West team, would have to play all them. Nebraska would have to play all them. You'd kind of have like more of a true test out of whoever came out of the West for the East, because they would have had to have gone through Oregon, USC. It would have been Oregon, USC, or maybe Nebraska comes up or something like that. And then the Big Ten East would, again, still all play each other like they always had in your Michigans, your Ohio States, your Penn States. And then Indiana would probably still be, I think they used to be in the East, if I'm remembering right. And they would have had to play all those teams too. So we would have really known if Indiana was still any good probably by this point if we still had divisions. But instead, some teams get some watered down schedules because they don't play. Let's see. Indiana doesn't play Oregon. Well, if they weren't in the West, they wouldn't play them anyway. But anyway, that's my thing. That's my shtick on that, I guess I should say. They don't play Oregon. They avoid Oregon. They avoid USC. They avoid Penn State. And let's be honest, Michigan. Michigan's now the 24th ranked team in the AP poll, by the way, and they really shouldn't even be in the AP poll, in my opinion. Anyway. Nick, that's the OnlyFans. That's the OnlyFans. You're on the wrong. You got to switch over to the OnlyFans for that. Anyway. DDR256 says, no, glad divisions are gone. Just need better scheduling. I could see that. Yeah. I think it just needs to be more balanced. I think. Well, hear me out. If we still had divisions, you could almost do with having 18 teams. With having 18 teams in a 9-game schedule, this is the way I see it. And I know this is a whole tangent. We are going to get into Penn State at USC, by the way. And Ohio State, Oregon. We haven't even gotten into that one yet. Bro, no call-in link tonight? We don't do call-ins yet. They haven't given me permission to do that yet. I'm new here, man. I don't know what to tell you. They haven't even shown me how to do call-ins. I don't know. I'm the new guy in the company here. Sorry. I'm the, what's his name, Milford or whatever? I just want my stapler, and I don't want my office moved again. Anyway, with 18 teams in 9 team divisions, playing 9 conference games, it's simple. You have 9 teams in your division, and you play 9 games. So you play 8 teams, the other 8 teams in your division, and you get 1 crossover game into the other division. So you could easily tier it like the NFL does. So my Detroit Lions won the NFC North last season. So what does that mean for their schedule? When they do crossover games into the other divisions, they play all the other teams that also won their division last year. Makes things a little more difficult, but it also provides what? Parity. We all love parity. We all love competitiveness. So let's say Oregon and Ohio State are the winners of the East and the West in any given year, which is probably, let's face it, those are the 2 top teams in this conference this year. I think any betting person would put money on those 2 teams making it to the conference championship this year. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate that. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Still don't know why they brought me on, but I'm here. And I'm not going to. This is just Coke, by the way. Totally just Coca-Cola in this glass. No need to look into it, Mark. Definitely not drinking on the job. I'm gonna beat that bit with a beating a dead horse tonight. Anyway, so your crossover game could be an Ohio State Oregon rematch. Boom, there you go. Big games, big money. All the advertisers love it. The Big Ten loves it. Oregon and Ohio State love it because whoever happens to host the game is going to get all the ticket sales and ticket revenue and all that good stuff. There can be a big noon kickoff. It can be an NBC Saturday night, whatever the hell they're calling it, with Fallout Boy doing the intro for that, by the way. God, that Fallout Boy aged like bad milk, didn't they? But that would be great. And then you could go down the tier. So like, let's say Michigan finished second in the East, USC finished second in the West the year before. Boom, rematch. There's your crossover game for each respective team, and go on down the list. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. And then you play the other 8 teams in your division. And then because all 9 teams in each division have played each other, you know who the best team in each division is, and you have balance now because you added the 4 West teams. The problem with the divisions in the Big Ten wasn't just that divisions are bad. It's because the divisions were unbalanced, and you had Michigan playing Purdue for the Big Ten championship game the week after they played the real Big Ten championship game against Ohio State. That was always the problem. The problem wasn't that you had divisions. The problem was that the divisions were unbalanced. When you brought the 4 West Coast teams in, it brought a great opportunity to bring balance to the divisions again. But no, they didn't do that. Now we get this wild scheduling, and Indiana avoids Penn State. They avoid Oregon. They avoid a lot of tough teams. And Indiana, the Indiana Hoosiers could end up going, I'm just going to say it right now, they could end up going 10-2. Now, Again, I think there's a little bit of fraud alert with this team because they have given up some points to lesser competition. There's gonna be a game where they're only up by like 3 points at the end of the third quarter again, like I think they were against Northwestern. There was a point in the second half in that game where they're only up by 3 points. They're gonna get into another game like that, and they're not gonna pull away at the end. That's my guess. So they'll probably lose a game that a lot of people think they shouldn't. They might lose at Michigan State. They might lose against Michigan still. Again, this team also hasn't played a team with a great defense so far this season. So they played Northwestern, Maryland, the Charlotte 49ers. By the way, shout out Biff Poggi, former Michigan guy. UCLA is a team in disarray right now. Western Illinois and FIU. They haven't played a single team. I'm betting none of these teams are even in the top 50 of SP plus defense. So I need to see them play a team with a real defense. I need to see them play a team with good trench play. Yeah, Jim R. They could also go 8-4. I mean, they could. That'd still be a huge step up for Indiana, though. What were they last season? 3-9 or something like that? Justin Hardy with a Alabama comment. Alabama lost because players bet to lose football game to win big money in casino. That's a theory. That's okay. Jackson Johnson, what's up, Big Ten Nation? What's up, Jackson Johnson? Hanging out here. Definitely talking some ball. That's what we do here, right? Talking Big Ten ball. But yeah, Indiana could go 8-4. They could go 11-1. It's really hard to tell with all that they've played. Again, FIU, Western Illinois, UCLA, Charlotte, Maryland. Sometimes too in college football, and this is my last point on Indiana before we get into these game previews. Sometimes I call it the deep ball heuristic, or if you want like the, I don't know, flashy offense fallacy, if you want to find one with an alliteration, kind of catchy. It seems like every other year there's a team that comes out and they air the ball out quite a bit. They score quite a few touchdowns. They have a flashy offense against lesser competition, and we all kind of pounce on them as they could be the team this year. Sometimes it's true. 2019 LSU happened. But also, this team put up 77 points against an FCS school, and a lot of us were like, whoa, what's Indiana doing? They put up 42 against UCLA, 52 against Charlotte. Charlotte was another game. I believe at one point they only led that game like 17-14, either right before or right after halftime, and then they pulled away. So a lot of they gave up 28 to Billy Edwards and Maryland, by the way. And Maryland is a team that lost to Michigan State. Not that transient property is a thing we want to do a lot of here, but it's tough to really suss out still halfway through the season as to how good Indiana really is.